I originally began to write this book with the intention of studying companies through very turbulent times, particularly recessions. And so my first stab at researching this book was in 1999 when I started tracking these firms that I felt were doing something about the recession and how they were going to tackle the recession. They had a strategy in mind, they had a coherent approach to doing it, and that was why I was writing this book. I got intrigued. I started following these companies. And I said, let me track these companies. And I tracked them, amazingly, to my surprise also, for over a decade, all the way through this recession. And through that, I realized that, yes, there was a story about how companies work through difficult market conditions, but I also came to realize that there was something that was happening that is transformative in the economy in the last decade, that is here to stay. And that has to do with the fact that with the increasing globalization of competition, we have now competitors from all over the world competing for the same pie, if you will. At the same time, customers who have more choices also have more information and know how to exercise choices. So you have a situation where customers are more informed and have more choices. Combine this with something else that was going on in a range of technologies and products. You saw what I would call a maturation of the product or technology where there was no more radical improvement happening. It's going to be an incremental adjustment, laptops, financial services, and so on and so forth. And so as I was going around to these companies, I would hear the same refrain: we're facing commoditization. I began in real estate management where they said, oh my God, real estate services, similar offering, customer wants to buy on price. So that's depressing. I went from there to financial services. I heard the same exact story. I went to advertising. I went to legal services, law firms. I heard the same exact story. I said, let me go into manufacturing. I went to GE Healthcare. And they said, oh my God, selling to hospitals, we got competition. They have choices. They're more informed. Our products are looking similar. They want to buy on price. I said, let me go from here. Let me go to California. I went to Cisco and I saw routers and switches. They said the same exact story. I said, let me go to pharmaceuticals. I went to several pharmaceutical companies. I heard the same story. This idea that customers have more choices, making those choices around price unless you have something meaningful and unique to offer. And in that context, I suddenly realized that what these companies were doing was they had figured out that if you're going to succeed in this kind of context, you need to shift the conversation away from just talking about your narrow product and service to finding some way to meaningfully deliver something of value to the customer, something they actually care about that is important in their lives, such as bag salad, and bag salad sells for $9 to $10 a pound, where customers could buy the ingredients for $1.50 a pound. And they're happy to pay 6 times for what they could have paid for it otherwise, because it addresses a meaningful problem in their lives. Now, as I was researching this, I found then, why doesn't this happen more naturally? Companies saying, I need to be more centered around my customers, because if I do that, I can somehow break through this difficult trap that I'm falling into. I then realized that companies don't naturally, spontaneously become oriented around their customers. They tend to become, as they become successful, more inward-looking, inside out. They produce something they think customers want, and then they try to sell it, as opposed to really working outside in as to understanding. And when they look at customers, they look at their customers through the lens of their product. Because the questions they're asking customers are, do you like my product? What do you like about it? What can I make it better for you? Would you recommend it to somebody else? Those are valid, meaningful questions, but those are questions that allow you to look at the customer through the lens of your product. They're not asking more open-ended, holistic questions. Who are you? What are the issues you're facing? What are the challenges you're facing? And this is true for business-to-business companies as well as business-to-consumer companies. So it was about awareness, but I realized that awareness was one thing. And awareness comes from having a curiosity to know more about your customers and a humility in a belief that customers actually know more about what they want than you do. But awareness was just part of the puzzle. I then came to realize the biggest obstacle companies faced in doing all this stuff was actually their own organization. Companies are fundamentally oriented, structured around product and geography, solving the 20th century problem, which was production and distribution. They don't necessarily orient and organize around customer. Take for example a retailer. You take a Target or a Best Buy. They are organized around merchandise. each merchandiser does his or her own thing. They're not necessarily coordinating, saying, what do my customers want integratively? My female customers want bundles. Oh, but I don't have a way to, I do one thing and not another thing. So for me, the realization was that the biggest barrier companies face is not knowing just why they need to change, not just knowing what they need to change, but actually the hardest part is how to do it. And so for me, this book really has a focus on implementation. It has a focus on how you actually get this done. And I think if I look in the market, I think what I realized was there's a big knowledge gap in understanding why companies need to think about customers. There was a big knowledge gap on what does it mean to really be customer-centric, which is becoming a platitude or a cliche. But the hardest part, and I think the biggest gap, is on the actual doing, how you get it done. And that for me is really important, because I think there's lots of research and books and articles out there on conceptual ideas that people read and put aside. But actually getting a roadmap on how you get something done, that's what we need today. I think is companies today struggle on execution. Conceptualization is important, but execution even more so. And that's why I wrote this book.